Hi, everyone. Hello from sunny San Francisco. Today I'm in SDF's San Francisco office. Thanks for joining today's webinar, which is the Stellar Asset Sandbox, your toolkit for exploring tokenization. I'm Lauren Thorbjornsen. I'm the Chief of Staff and the Vice President of Communications at SDF, and I'm going to be your host today. You'll hear today from Paul Wong, who is our Director of Product, CBDCs and Institutions, Billy Grenis, who leads institutional partnerships, and then Fabricius Zatti, who's the Engineering Manager at Cheesecake Labs. And we'll have some time at the end for your questions, so feel free to submit in the Q&A box, which you can find in your toolbar, and ask them throughout the presentation, and we'll try to answer as many as we can at the end. So with that, I'm going to start this by handing it over to Paul. Paul, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Lauren. I am delighted to be here today with you and two amazing individuals, Billy and FIFO, to introduce our Asset Sandbox to the community. Billy and FIFO, among others at SDF and our partners at Cheesecake Labs, have been hard at work over the last few months to create new resources for asset issuers. The Sandbox provides users with hands-on experience in designing and issuing Stellar assets on testnet. Stellar has a number of unique controls which allow issuers to manage who can hold the asset and determine how those assets are used. That's real power in the hands of issuers to issue customized assets based on use case, regulatory regimes, and issuer preferences. Let's get started. Billy.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul. And let's go to the next slide, Lauren. Thank you. So today we want to talk about the Stellar network in the context of specifically asset issuance. So first, I'm just going to set a brief agenda. We're going to talk about the network's core asset issuance capabilities, what makes Stellar great for asset issuance. We're going to describe the process of how you actually issue an asset on Stellar. And then, of course, we want you to see this live in action. So we're going to have FIFO show you just how easy it is to issue an asset on Stellar using the sandbox that both Lauren and Paul just talked about. Stellar was built for tokenizing real-world value, including fiat, securities, commodities, really any type of asset. And users can hold those assets in Stellar-enabled wallets or apps, use it to make payments, and trade it to other assets on the network. Asset issuance is the backbone of the Stellar network, and our partners have tokenized some of the world's most used assets on Stellar to allow for the creation of a universal payment system. And we'll look at some of those examples of companies in just a little bit. So why Stellar? Well, Stellar is a distributed blockchain network that allows one to digitize assets and transfer value quickly, efficiently, and securely. It is in particularly optimized for payments. Its speed, security, reliability, and ability to maintain scale are really its core strengths. Transactions on Stellar confirm in around 5 seconds, meaning it's fast enough for in-person transactions. Transactions are low cost, and oftentimes 1 cent can cover thousands of transactions. And Stellar can scale. Right now, under current settings, Stellar can achieve up to about 1,500 transactions a second. But of course, there's research and innovations in progress today to help that to get to the tens of thousands. So it can eventually become the global network for movement of assets. Now, the ease at which one can issue assets on Stellar is complemented by Stellar's unique built-in programmatic functions for controlling how these assets are used. So these controls include the ability to limit how the asset is used, who can hold it by setting different configuration flags when issuing an asset. So the first one here, the approve users flag, allows an issuer to approve an account to hold its asset. So this is an important setting when, say, an issuer wants to pre-qualify its the holders of the asset, for example, for the collection of information for, say, compliance checks like KYC, know your customer, AML, anti-money laundering, and CFT, counter the financing of terrorism. Next, we have the freeze accounts flag. And this allows an issuer to essentially revoke access or remove authorization of an account to send or receive that asset. So in cases maybe where an account no longer meets the approved criteria, say a KYC requirement, that account holder's access to assets can be revoked, effectively freezing the assets in the account, meaning this account can no longer send or receive this asset. And finally, there's the clawback flag. And this allows the issuer to actually burn assets that are existing in account. So this functionality could be useful in, say, a case of fraud, or even if just a customer lost their account keys and you want to be able to reissue the asset back to them, or maybe it's just to comply with local regulations. And the best part about all of these controls is that they can be enforced even on self-hosted wallets. So these are really all great features, but how do you issue an asset on Stellar? And Stellar is unique in that there's no dedicated mint or issue operation. Assets are actually typically created on Stellar by a simple payment operation. In Stellar, an asset is issued when an asset is transferred from one account to another. And it's really straightforward. It's a process that follows 4 steps. One is creating an issuing account. Then it's creating a distribution account. Then there's something called establishing a trust line between these 2 accounts, which is essentially saying the second account will trust the first account to receive assets that it distributes or that it issues. And then the 4th step is simply sending an asset from the issuing account to the distribution account. It really is that easy. Now, there is one thing to note that both the issuing and distribution account are standard accounts on Stellar. We just use that nomenclature to make it clear exactly which actions are taken by which of the 2 accounts during asset issuance. So in this case, the issuing account is the origin of the asset and forever linked to that asset's identity. And the distribution account is the first recipient of that asset. There are many well-known institutions already issuing on Stellar, and here are just a few examples. I'll quickly run through them. GMO Trust, which is a New York-based limited purpose trust company, which is a subsidiary of a much larger company in Japan, has launched Japanese yen and a US dollar stablecoin on Stellar. Franklin Templeton has issued a money market fund on chain. And this fund is powered by Stellar and can trade 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Essentially, you don't need to wait 24 hours to have a human moving around paper and working on that settlement. And ultimately, it was aimed to create a more secure system and decrease fees that are typically associated with purchasing those types of funds. ABN AMRO, which is one of the more recent ones, has recently tokenized corporate debt on Stellar to enable access to a much broader audience than the typical large institutions that they were able to serve. Tascom Bank, one of our partners in Ukraine, has piloted issuing a digital hryvnia, or e-hryvnia, which is Ukraine's local currency. And they've done this to work on payroll and potential programmable payments. And this was all under the supervision of the National Bank of Ukraine. And then finally, USDC, which is much larger than 6 billion, but this is the article that was released when it was issued on Stellar. But USDC from Circle is on Stellar, and that is one of the largest and most trusted US dollar stablecoins. So finally, the 4 steps we discussed earlier on how to issue an asset. Remember, the issuing account, the distribution account, creating the trust line, and ultimately making a payment from the issuing to the distribution account can actually be programmed on Stellar quite easily in just 1 or 2 or 3 simple lines of code. And so while that may be simple for the average developer, we wanted asset issuance to be open to anyone. So we worked with Cheesecake Labs to develop the no-code Asset Issuance Sandbox. which just shortly we'll have FIFO demo. And quickly, he's going to go through how the sandbox works, how to create and mint an asset. He's going to explore some of those asset control capabilities that I discussed earlier, like authorizing and freezing accounts and clawbacks. And he's going to go through many of the other features of the Stellar network and the sandbox that him and his team built. So with that, we can stop sharing the screen and I will hand it over to FIFO, who can demo the asset sandbox. Thanks, FIFO.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Billy. And let me just quickly share my screen here so you guys can see what I'm seeing. And I believe you should be able to see my second screen right now. Awesome. So as Billy mentioned, awesome. Thank you so much, Billy. And also, guys, thanks for having me today. So as Billy mentioned, the sandbox was created in this joint effort between Cheesecake Labs and SDF. And the main objective of it is for it to be a facilitator to help you issue and manage assets in the Stellar testnet with no lines of code required. So with that said, it is a non-custodial solution. And that means that it does not hold any information about the accounts or about the private keys. It does not authorize for the transactions by itself. We are the ones controlling the accounts. So because of that, we need to meet a few requirements before we start using the sandbox. So once you access it, you'll notice we have this first screen that specifies the requirements. And the first one is to have Freighter Wallet installed. It is integrated to the sandbox, and Freighter Wallet is a non-custodial wallet that works as a browser extension. It's pretty much like MetaMask does for different networks, but in this case, specific for Stellar. Once you have it installed, the second step is to make sure you have testnet selected. So check here on top if you have testnet and make sure it is selected. And the third and the last one is related to those 4 steps that Billy just mentioned. For us to use the sandbox, we need to have at least 2 accounts created and funded with Lumens. And if you have questions throughout the way on how to do these things and how to use the sandbox, once you get started, look for these question marks. With these, you can find some helpful tips and some helpful information on how to use the sandbox and what are the hidden features that you could be exploring around. So for the demo today, let me access my Freighter account. And here you can see when I click on this identical that I have a bunch of accounts already prepared. And for today, I'll be using account number 7 and account number 8. So account number 7 will be my issuing account. And as Billy mentioned, the issuing account is the account that identifies and controls the asset. So it is the only account that can generate new supply and mint new units of the asset. And the account number 8 will be my distribution account, which means that whenever I mint new units, they'll go straight to the account number 8 as my distribution account, and it will be responsible for distributing to the other accounts in the network. So to access the sandbox, I need to provide the public key of my issuing account. In this case, I'll select account number 7. And once it is selected here on Freighter, I just need to click on this key icon and it will load for me. And there we go, we're in. So what the sandbox did right now is that it went into the chain, into the network and collected the public information about this account. So how is it configured? What are the assets that you have for this account? So here on top, we can see that I'm accessing with my account number 7. And here we can go to the settings portion. We'll come back to this later. Down below, we have the asset list. So here I'm seeing all of the assets that I have issued already with this account, and they're all existing in the testnet. Some of them have some supply. And if I keep going down, I'll reach the forging area. And here's where we can go to create a new asset. And as Billy mentioned, it's a very simple process. So I'll borrow some help from this question mark. And as he mentioned, we need 2 accounts, the issuing and the distribution account. And when we're forging an asset on Stellar, we are basically creating the first reference to this asset on chain. And by following this design of a pair of accounts, the first reference that we're creating is the first trust line. And FIFO, what is a trust line? Well, since Stellar have the ability to create custom tokens, any account can create custom tokens. We, as users, the other accounts, they need to signal to the network that they trust the tokens, they trust the assets before they can interact with them. So in our use case here, the first reference we're going to create is the trust line for our distribution account, telling the network, hey, Stellar, I trust this issuing account to mint this token and send to me. So let's go ahead and do this right now. The information of the issuing account comes pre-filled based on the account I use to access the tool. And I just need to inform the distribution account. So I'll go ahead on my Fair wallet and select my account number 8 here. There we go. And I'm going to click on the key. So it loads the public key. And now I need to name my asset. And this is pretty much like a ticker or a short name for the asset, like BTC for Bitcoin. So here I'll be creating the asset named Moon. So once I click on submit, and let me show you guys, I was prompted by Freighter to authorize the transaction. So the sandbox gathered this information and prepared the transaction to send to Stellar with the instructions to create this trust line. Here I can see on top that this transaction will be approved with account number 8. And that makes sense because we're creating a trust line for account number 8. So it needs to explicitly authorize it. Down below, we have the operations, which are the actions the network is going to execute. And the operation we are using for a trust line is an operation called change trust. So we can use this to create and update existing trust lines. Here, we are creating a trust line for the asset named Moon, issued specifically by account number 7. And this trust line will belong to account number 8. So we are revising, everything looks okay. And down below, we see the maximum fee that we are willing to pay for this transaction to go through. And here we can see that it is 0.001 lumen. So it is a fraction of a cent of a dollar. It's very cheap. Once I click on approve, I'll be prompted to input my password. Let me put it real quick. And now it is being signed and submitted to the network. And as Billy mentioned, it takes just a couple of seconds. And there you go. It was executed and my asset was created. Simple as that. If I go to my Freighter wallet now and select my account number 8, you can see that Moon is listed here. There are no units, but the trust line was created. It is referenced in the network, so the network knows the asset exists. So, all right, let's start using it. Let's start creating some supply. Since it was already created, if I look back in the list, I can identify it here, and I just need to click on Manage. This will take me to the management portion, and here I see that I am managing the asset named Moon, issued by account number 7, and distributed by account number 8. To manage the supply, we're going to use these 2 tabs at the very beginning, which are reserved for minting and burning units. For the minting workflow, it's pretty simple. As Billy mentioned, just a payment. So I'm going to input the amount. I'm going to mint 10,000 units, and they're going to be sent straight to the distribution address. So I'll click on mint, and I'll be prompted to revise the transaction once again. And this time it is being signed by account number 7. So remember, the account that approves the generation of new supply is the issuing account, in our demo, number 7. So that makes sense. And the operation I'm using is a payment. I'm performing a payment from the issuing account to the distribution account. So whenever the issuing account sends tokens they control to another account, these units are being generated. That's how the concept works in the Stellar network. So simple as that. I'm going to approve, input my password, and it's being processed. And one quick tip is that whenever you run a transaction like this in the sandbox, you might see this confirmation box with a link. If you click on this link, it will take you to the web explorer where you can see information live from the network. So here we see information from the testnet, and here we see the transaction that just went through. We see that its status is successful, it was executed, at which block it was included, and down below we see the operations. So the account number 7 transferred 10,000 Moon units to the distribution account, which was account number 8. Awesome. So simple as that. If I look into my wallet right now, my account number 8 will have the 10,000 units of Moon. So now I can start using this and distributing to other accounts. And if I want to do the opposite, if I want to burn units and remove from circulation, it is the same concept, but in reverse. So instead of sending units from my issuing account to my distribution or any other accounts, I'll be sending units from other accounts back into my issuing account. So when the issuing account receives these units, they are burned and removed from circulation. So that's a pretty simple design that allows you to do it with just one simple operation. So, all right, we have minted, we talked about burn, we generated our assets. So let's start talking about payments, how we transfer our token around in a network. And we can do this through the tab transfer. And once you have it in your wallet, you can also use the wallet directly. If you click here, you'll be able to perform payments straight from the wallet. If you want to send to accounts that are using other wallets and experiment with the ecosystem, you're free to do it. If you want to try around other combinations of accounts, feel free to do it. That's the purpose of the sandbox, to show how easy and how customizable this process is. So to transfer and perform payments, now that's a subject that I really like about Stellar, because you don't have just the simple payments. You have a lot of flavors of payments. If you like, you can create payments with different rules and some specific preconditions to be executed. And here in the sandbox, we added two options, the normal payments plus a different one, just so you can play around and see how it works. So as we mentioned, if your account is going to handle a custom asset in the Stellar network, you need to have a trust line that informs the network that you trust this asset. But let's take as an example, account number 9. Let's say account number 9 is a friend of mine that has a lot of tokens, but does not have the Moon token. They didn't create the trust line. They don't know I have this token. They don't trust it yet. So if I try to perform a payment to this account right now, the network will reject. It will say, hey, FIFO, I cannot send a payment to this account. They do not trust your token. Sorry about that. So if we do this with the sandbox, and let me go ahead and send 100 units from the distribution address, which has the tokens we just minted, to my friend's account. If we do that, the sandbox will verify and see that there is no trust line. So automatically, instead of using a normal payment, it is going to choose a claimable balance operation. And that's a special type of payment that works in 2 steps in Stellar. So I'll go ahead and approve this. Let me sign. And now what is happening is that the network is doing the first step of a claimable balance, which is reserving that amount. So those 100 units of Moon were reserved to this recipient in case the recipient decides to accept it. So if I look in the Explorer right now, let me go and show you how it looks. Here is the transaction. And here you can see it has a different operation, creating a claimable balance. That's the recipient. And I'll go ahead and look in this address, which is my friend's address. And here I can see my friend address has a lot of trust lines. These blue squares represent trust lines, but they don't have Moon here. Where did the 100 units go? So if I look here on the left in this very small portion, we can see pending claimable balances. And this area shows the balances that are reserved to this account, and the user can decide to accept or not. So my friend could look into here and see, oh, I have 100 units of Moon pending that were sent by this account. Oh, that's FIFO's account. So I trust this entity. I trust this issue. So I will accept. And once they accept it, the trust line is created automatically and they receive that amount of tokens. And the neat thing about it is that you can try different logics and different conditions with this type of payments. For example, if I want to create a programmed payment for the next month, I could add that as a rule to the claimable balance. I could say, hey, I'm sending 100 units of Moon to my friend, but they can only claim it by next month. So this way, the balance is reserved right away. No one can touch it. It's safe. And my friend will only be able to accept it when the next month comes. So that's just one of the examples of how you can play around with these different flavors of payments. Now, let me go back and show you how you can do the normal version of the payments. So when using Freighter or other wallets, generally they have some options for you to look for the assets, look for the issuers, and add the trust line signal to the network that you trust them directly from the wallet. But here I'm going to show you a little hack you can do with the sandbox to do it via the sandbox. So if I go back to the list and to the forging area again, you might remember that I mentioned that in this area, we were actually creating a trust line for the distribution account. So it was the first trust line for the asset. So if we use the same area to create a trust line for a separate account, we could create the trust line that the account doesn't have. So let me go around and select account number 9, which represents my friend's account, and it still does not have the trust line. There's no Moon here. So I'll just input it instead of the distribution account, and I'll refer to my asset, Moon asset. Let me submit. Let me bring it here. Here I can see that I am approving it with account number 9. So that's important. You need to sign with the account. So if I didn't have my friend's account here, I wouldn't be able to sign in their name. They need to sign this transaction. And I'm creating a trust line for the Moon asset issued by account number 7, but this time it will belong to account number 9. So I'll go ahead and approve. Put my password real quick, and it's being processed. And now what is going on is that this trust line is being added to my friend account. If I go back to account number 9, we can see they have a trust line for Moon, and they now can receive Moon tokens. So if I go back to the management area for Moon and go to transfer, select, let's say 150 units, and I want to send them from the distribution address to my friend's account, hit transfer. And this time you'll see that I'm using a simple payment. So the sandbox automatically identified that this account has a trust line already. So I can just do a normal payment. And there you go. By approving it, I'll be sending these 150 units of Moon to my friend account, and they will be credited right away with no necessity to do an extra step. So by looking here, account, let me select number 9. There we go, 150 units of Moon. Awesome. So you could see that the process is pretty simple to create accounts, move the assets around. Now let me talk about the other aspect that Billy said, which is the control mechanisms. As you might have noticed, there are 2 tabs here that are disabled. And why is that? By default, when I start issuing assets, if I don't do any special configuration, they will be considered a permissionless asset, which means that they behave similar to the native token. Anyone can create a trust line and anyone can move and receive funds around. But if I want to create a unique profile for my asset, I have some options that I can enable, and these allow me to customize within a spectrum that go from permissionless to a very tightly controlled asset, a very permissioned asset. And these are done through authorization flags. So let me go back to the list, because these flags are configured in the issuing account. So if I go here and access the settings for my issuing account, you see that we have these 2 flags. And here we have implemented in the sandbox the 2 use cases that Billy mentioned, the freeze and the clawback. So I'll go ahead and enable those, hit save, and these will prompt me to authorize the transaction. And when I do that, these flags will be enabled for my issuing account. And as a result, all of the tokens that are managed by my issuing account will be impacted. So now all of the tokens that are controlled by this account can perform a freeze and can perform a clawback operation. So let me show you how this looks. And now I'll get my star token, let's say, which already have some supply and have some accounts using. There we go. You can see the tabs are not now enabled. So let's go to the freeze tab. And now to freeze an account, all we need to do is to provide an address, a target address. So let's say that account number 9 was involved in some suspicious activity and we need to investigate. So I'll select it here, add it as the target address and hit freeze. By confirming it, I'll be prompted to authorize a transaction. And what this transaction is doing right now, it is being signed by my issuing account because it's the only account that can freeze accounts using their asset. And the freeze works by revoking the authorization that the target account have. So it's not authorized to move around the asset anymore. So if I look in the Explorer, let me show how this looks. If I go here and access the target account, you see the trust lines, you see the star trust line, and you see it has a little lock. This indicates that this balance, it is in place, but it is frozen. They cannot receive any more units and they cannot send units to anyone. Simple as that. And if I want to unfreeze this account, all I need to do is do the same thing again. I will put the target address and hit unfreeze. And by unfreezing, I'll be authorizing the account again to hold my asset. And it will be able to receive and move assets around again. And this can be used in different use cases. Like, for example, different combinations of these authorization flags could be used for a KYC workflow, where any account that creates a trust line needs explicit approval from the issuer account before they can start operating with the token. So you could make sure that anyone can create accounts and create trust lines, but they cannot hold my asset until they submit the right documentation and I verify the documentation and then I authorize their accounts to operate with my asset. And I don't need to have custody of their accounts. As the issuer of the asset, I am able to do that with this authorization flag. And the clawback is a step further into the permission side of the spectrum. So the clawback allows you to tag an account And when I add here the target accounter, I can select an amount, and this amount will be burned. It will be removed from that account. This is reserved for very specific use cases. Like, for example, if I identify an account that was compromised and it was hacked, and I want to remove the tokens from the hands of the hacker, I could target the account and burn the tokens that the hacker was holding, or I could combine it to create some creative use cases. Like, for example, last year we had the innovation challenge that the central bank holds here in Brazil, and we participated alongside some partner of ours with some very interesting use cases. We were exemplifying a investment token that was earning interest in a CBDC wrapped in a public network, in this case, Stellar. And in this use case, the investment token had a deadline to perform the payout, and the payout was supposed to go in the CBDC wrapped. So what we did is that we had a workflow that automatically identified the accounts, identified how many tokens they had, the investment tokens, performed the clawback, burning the investment tokens, and at the same time, in an atomic transaction, paid the earnings in the CBDC wrapped. So for the user, it was a completely transparent process, and it was totally automated. So you can see that you can combine these features to reach really unique use cases for your asset, depending on what's their objective. And for today, I covered the most of the features that I wanted. And if you want to see more details about it and other features that we didn't go in detail here, I suggest you have a look at the video that we just published 2 weeks ago about how to use the Stellar Asset Sandbox. There we have a complete step-by-step guide that we show all the features and all the neat features you could be playing around with. So with that in mind, I think I'll hand back to Lauren.
Thank you, FIFO, for that awesome demo. That was incredible. And thank you to the whole Cheesecake Labs team for building such an awesome product, and to everyone here for spending some time with us. We're almost time for questions. So give me 1 second and we're gonna come back here and I'm gonna dig right in. If you guys have any questions, please submit your questions via the Q&A in the toolbar. If you haven't already, we have a bit of a queue, so I'm just gonna jump right in so we can maximize our time together and start with Paul. Paul, the first question here for you is, what is next for the Stellar Asset Sandbox?
So this is version 1 of the sandbox. As we look towards the future, we hope to incorporate features that will demonstrate other network capabilities. We plan to incorporate tools, for example, that facilitate securities tokenization. We also plan to integrate our new smart contracts platform, Soroban, into the sandbox. But we also want to hear from you on what features you want to see in the sandbox. So send us an email with your ideas as well.
Exciting. Okay, I've got one here for you, FIFO, which is, if you are happy with your results after using the sandbox, is there a way to switch over to mainnet?
Great question, great question. So the objective of the sandbox is to work for educational purpose, to show the capabilities, show how easy it is to use. So we locked it in place with the testnet so that you don't send any transaction to the mainnet by mistake, you don't submit it by mistake, so you can play around safely. So for now, there are no plans to change it to the mainnet. We're sticking to the testnet just for the educational purposes.
Awesome. Okay, Billy, I got one for you here, which is kind of a two-piecer. They're sort of related. So how can institutional asset issuers start issuing? And similarly, what kind of resources, how much support does Stellar provide? So like tutorials or customer support or documentation for moving, for example, from ETH to Stellar or other blockchains?
Yep, great. Well, the great thing about Stellar is that it's an open network. So an institutional issuer can get started right away issuing assets. Of course, we wanted to make that as the foundation as easy as possible. And so that's why we created this sandbox to begin playing with issuing assets on testnet. And that's why we created our whole asset issuance landing page now on our website, which gives a full kind of end-to-end place to show all of the resources that we have when it comes to asset issuance. Everything from a guidebook on how to issue assets, videos on how to use this sandbox, some partners we worked with, and our integration, our technical partners that can help a institution on their way, Cheesecake Labs being one of them. Of course, you can always reach out to the Stellar Development Foundation, and that's part of my role is to work with institutions and to support them on their journey, everything from finding use cases or helping them come up with use cases to working with our technical partners on how to actually implement and move forward. In terms of switching networks, we don't necessarily have a tutorial itself to go from, say, Ethereum to Stellar, but we do have robust documentation on the web for how you would issue an asset. And it's really in two places. We have a guidebook, which is specifically on issuing assets, but then we have detailed developer docs as well, which can give you, bits of code and the technical ways to actually deploy your own asset.
You guys, so I keep advancing because there's so many questions coming in. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen because you guys know now if you want to submit questions in the Q&A bar. That way I stop advancing to make you think that we're wrapping up the webinar just yet. We still have time for a few more questions. So Paul, I'm coming to you now. What considerations are needed for issuing assets on Stellar?
So I think for those of you interested in using Stellar for asset issuance, I think there are three questions to really consider. The first is, what is the value proposition for issuing an asset on the blockchain? Not everything is designed for the blockchain, but many things are. And I would encourage potential issuers to think about why they're using the blockchain. If you need help, you can always come to us. The second question is, how do we structure our activity to meet local regulations where relevant? Different jurisdictions have different rules. Understanding what those rules are, what is and is not possible, is really key to the success of asset issuance on Stellar. The third is making sure that there are internal buy-ins and operational changes. We recognize that issuing assets on the blockchain may be new to many companies. Obtaining internal buy-ins and having the right processes and procedures are really key to asset issuance. Thanks, Lauren.
Thank you. All right, I got another one here for you, FIFA, which is, can these assets be used with the DEX?
Oh, awesome question. Yeah, they can. That's one of the good things about the Asset Issuance Stellar. When you use native issuance, all of the assets are automatically integrated with the DEX. And the good thing is, no matter which operation you're doing with DEX, if you are creating orders, if you are meeting orders, they all obey to the authorization flags that you have set for your asset. So an issuer can be sure that no one is missing the rules that you have set. If you created some tight controls for your asset, they need to be obeyed through the DEX as well. So that was a really nice question.
You're a popular person. You got a couple more. So is the sponsor concept covered in the sandbox?
Good one as well. So it's not in this version, but we are thinking about ways we could add, because it's a very nice feature that we could highlight. And just to give an overview for people that don't know, the sponsor feature is a way that you could combine alongside with other features like the fee bump to redirect some costs of the transactions to specific accounts. So you could have some operational wallets managing the costs, managing how much UREC is using in your use case. And that makes easier for issuer accounts to manage what are the cuts of this infrastructure, how much am I paying for my transactions, and how can I do that with ease, looking at just one place. So really nice. We're thinking about ways of adding this one.
Thank you. Okay, I don't know, this is maybe for Billy or Paul, or any of you, or FIFA, maybe you again, but what types of tokens can we mint using the sandbox? Is it NFTs, fungible or non-fungible, or regulated tokens?
FIFA, take it.
Well, basically, you could go crazy with it. So it all depends on how you represent them on chain. So here we have some of the functionalities and some of the mechanisms, but Stellar has much more than what we baked in the sandbox. So there are other controls you could create and other ways of representing. Like, for example, if you want to represent an NFT, you could simply generate an asset that has only 1 unit of supply, and you could lock that supply at 1 unit. So you could know that nobody can mint more units. So it represents the NFT. And you could use some special ways to add the metadata, the information about the NFT. So that's just one example. That's why I recommend you guys to play around, really try to break the sandbox. That's why it's there for. It's to show how flexible these rules are.
Thank you. While we're on the topic of the types of assets, Billy, maybe this isn't exactly part of this conversation, but someone's curious about how prices of the issued assets could be established.
Yeah, so of course, this sandbox is more about issuing and how assets are issued, but it makes sense, what is going to be the value of that asset? I think typically we work with partners that are going to back the asset that they issue 1-to-1 with something else. So the example that's easiest is USDC working with Circle. Circle is the trusted custodian, or not necessarily custodian because the dollars are held in the bank, but the entity that is backing USDC. And they're saying at any time we will redeem 1 USDC for 1 US dollar. And so the value of that asset would be determined by what the underlying asset is. Of course, trust is important, and Stellar has a number of features that can enable the trust, such as TOML files, which I'm not sure if FIFO did get into, but for another time. But the idea is that as long as you trust the asset issuer, whatever is backing that asset, should determine its value.
Thanks, Billy. So I think there's someone here who's a little bit curious about the clawback feature. Are there requirements that must be met before you can claw back an asset from an app?
Awesome. I think I'll take that one because it's a bit technical. And yes, there are some requirements because it's a very, very important mechanism. And the first thing you must have in mind is that only the issuer can do this. So it's necessary to authorize the transactions with the issuing account. And you can build different use cases around that with multi-signature that you have natively on Stellar as well. So you could have a set of conditions. So you could, for example, share this responsibility with different entities and different people. So they all have to agree together into performing the clawback before it happens. And in terms of building the mechanism, like the APIs, it's all up to how you want to customize this workflow. So we experienced with very different use cases, like some very tight and some very simple, and you can just go crazy with it. It's really flexible.
Okay. One more technical question for you, since we're on the topic of technical issues. What are the specific technical requirements for issuing assets on the Stellar network using the Asset Issuance Sandbox?
Awesome. As I mentioned before, you need to have the Freighter wallet installed, and you need to basically create 2 accounts on it and fund with Lumens. Just 3 simple steps. They are explained on the help icon at the first screen. Just follow it and you'll be able to issue assets and play around with everything that I just showed.
Cool. And Billy, I'm just gonna ask one last question to you here, which is how does, and I think you were sort of touching on this a couple minutes ago, but how does this work for real physical assets?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if real physical, you mean like literally a piece of gold, or if you just mean with something that's not digital, on a blockchain, say a dollar in a bank account. But in either case, it's the entity that's issuing the asset that would then be kind of the bridge between the real world or the physical world, if you want to say, and the digital blockchain world. So a custodian could say, hey, we're going to issue 1,000 tokens for every bar of gold we have, every pound of gold, and then that would be redeemable through this entity. And what's on Stellar or issued on Stellar would be a digital representation of that, which can typically be more freely traded and moved because of the advantages that Stellar offers.
Awesome. Okay. Before we wrap, one last reminder, Billy, maybe you can tell everyone if they want to learn more or engage with you guys or with FIFO or Cheesecake, what do people do next?
Yeah, I know. So for sure, go to stellar.org /asset issuance. Is that Is that the right site? But of course, yeah, please feel free to reach out to us with questions. FIFO and his team are, an amazing technical resource. They know Stellar so well. And of course, our team focuses on it. So please reach out, please check out our website and start playing with the sandbox. Break it, as FIFO says.
Break it. That was amazing. Thank you so much, Paul, Billy, FIFO. Carolyn shared in the chat exactly where to go. First, definitely follow us at stellar.org, where you can hear more updates about things like the Asset Issuance Sandbox. But if you want to learn more specific about that, the URL is in there. And with that, a big thank you again to FIFO and Cheesecake Labs and to our SDF speakers. It was a pleasure to have you guys here today, and the recording will be up shortly for anyone who wants to come back and look at this. So thanks again. Talk to you guys all soon.
Thank you.